Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. Bryan Kohberger gets a win. A home invasion is caught on video. The original prosecutor on the Ahumaud Arbery case goes to trial. Did she try to tip the scales of justice? An ex-detective leaves a note before bringing his trial to an end. A case where divorce was not an option. Another zero remorse story with a twist. We have this day in legal history and our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it.
All right, lawyer.
Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. Thanks for joining us. You know the drill. Subscribe if you haven't. Like if you do. Leave me a comment below. Hit that bell for notifications. And yes, you can check us out on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Now, please, before we get to the docket, go to crimetalksearch.com. Sign up for that background subscription service today. When you do, you're going to be able to do as many background searches as you desire. And you're going to get a report literally completed while you wait, and it will be emailed to you, and you will even get updates as new information becomes available on the person that you are searching. That report is going to have all kinds of information related to that individual's background, property they own, whether they're married, divorced, whether they have a criminal history, and whether they have lots of social media contacts. That's right, you're going to find out all the social media that maybe you don't know about, but maybe you should. Go to crimetalksearch.com. You're going to be happy you did. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us for our live last night. It was, I think, a great show, as always, and we did the call-in line, which is always interesting as well. So if you didn't join us last night, you can go check it out as well. All right, let's go ahead and open the record for January 29th, 2025. And first on the docket, Bryan Kohberger gets a win. Now, did he get his case thrown out? Did he get some evidence suppressed? Not yet, but he did get the judge to order the secret hearing released, at least the transcript anyway. I'll explain. So the judge overseeing the case against the man accused of 4 students that were murdered, Bryan Kohberger, has announced that he will release a redacted transcript from a closed-door hearing held last week, which he had initially barred the public and the media from attending. So the Ada County Judge Stephen Hippler told officials to hand over verbatim copies of the unredacted transcript from the sealed hearing on January 23rd to both the prosecution and the defense so that they can recommend proposed redactions. Now, both sides will have 14 days to identify portions of the transcript that should be redacted from public disclosure, providing a basis for the same. Now, thereafter, the court noted in the order, the court will release to the public a redacted transcript of the previously closed portion of the hearing. Now, remember, this is significant because the hearing regarding forensic investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, the evidence that was used to link Bryan Kohberger to these murders, that's what was discussed. Obviously, Kohberger's lawyers want all of that evidence thrown out. So we're going to get to find out why the prosecution doesn't want this released to the public. Very interesting indeed. So we brought you the hearings last week, but during a 2-day public proceeding, following a closed hearing last week, the attorneys argued that the FBI violated Kohberger's Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, the judge was somewhat skeptical and actually even said, I struggle with the idea that DNA left at a crime scene, that there's any expectation of privacy to that. The judge asked Ann Taylor, Kohberger's lead attorney, and Hippler appeared unreceptive to their argument that the IgG techniques violated Kohberger's constitutional rights and questioned whether the defendant even had standing to challenge the investigatory tactics that the FBI used. The judge noted it wasn't his DNA that was searched. At best, it was his ancestors. Ms. Taylor also argued that the FBI violated its own internal policy when checking IgG samples against a database. The judge asked prosecutors why he should allow the evidence to be introduced. The prosecution countered in their argument that there is no expectation of privacy in connection with public records and crime scene evidence. And the Idaho Deputy Attorney General stated to the court that the FBI's interim policy that Ms. Taylor questions does not impose any legal limitations on otherwise lawful investigative or prosecutorial activities. So much of the IGG process has been sealed by the court, and the unredacted transcripts will give us a little more detail on how investigators pieced together the case in the weeks following the murder and tracked Bryan Kohberger to his house in Pennsylvania. Now, ahead of the hearing, the defense had asked the proceedings to be public, and a briefing on the matter was to be unsealed, but Hippler denied that request. Now, we will learn what steps the prosecution has taken and why they're fighting so hard to keep this from the defense and the public. News media organizations had filed requests for this hearing to be open, and ultimately the judge, I guess, somewhat conceded, but they argued it is the openness of the interested parties that seek to ensure so that they can play their vital role as surrogates for the public in providing an accurate and unbiased depiction of the upcoming criminal proceedings for which Idaho and its people are deeply concerned about, and people nationwide, to be quite frank. Anyway, Kohberger is scheduled for a trial later this year in regards to the home invasion murders of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zaina Kernoble, and Ethan Chapin. Now, remember that attack took place about 4 a.m. on November 13th of 2022, and all four were inside their off-campus house that they were renting. Kohberger was a PhD student studying criminology at Washington State University, just up the road in Pullman, Washington, which is about 10 miles away from the crime scene. Now, originally, the judge handling the case, Judge entered pleas on behalf of Mr. Kohberger at his arraignment back in 2023. And Kohberger's lawyers ultimately moved for the change of venue, and they got new judge on this case, Judge Hippler. Now, if Kohberger is convicted, he could face the death penalty, and the defense is still awaiting Judge Hippler's decision on whether to grant a Franks hearing in which they hope to have the warrants in the case thrown out. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. They're rarely granted and even more rarely successful. Interesting, but it is a win. Kohberger, there's some reason why the defense finally decided that they want all this information open to the public. Remember, it was defense that wanted it all sealed originally. Something has changed. What has changed? Well, there must be something that they think the public may find offensive as to how the prosecution used this particular information. I mean, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. You really don't have an expectation of privacy as to information that your ancestors gave to this organization to figure out their heredity, right? Particularly if you weren't involved in it. So I think that's why ultimately the judge will rule against the defense. But there must be something that the defense thinks is going to help them in the court of public opinion as to why they're doing this. And apparently the judges realized, well, there's apparently nothing here that's so offensive or outrageous that it needs to be released to the public. I'm of the opinion that this all should have been released to the public. All the briefings should have been released to the public, and all of the hearings should have been open to the public. I think that creates appellate issues when the judges start having closed proceedings and there's no basis for that. You can go into any courtroom across the country, and I don't care how heinous of the case it is, you as a member of the public can sit in there and watch all of those motions hearings. I don't understand why Idaho thinks they can do everything in private. It's absolutely disgusting, in my opinion. Next, a home invasion is caught on video. So a late night home invasion led to a little shootout between the resident in his underwear and the gun-toting intruder, leaving 3 people with bullet wounds. Benjamin Nevers of Dearborn Heights, Michigan, and his girlfriend were asleep in the apartment that they shared together with a friend over the weekend when they heard a window break in the kitchen. 2 suspects had broken in and held Nevers' roommate at gunpoint in the living room. Nevers quickly rose from the bed, picked up his gun, and stood at the ready for the alleged burglars to open his bedroom door. Now, he woke up, and he was rather quick, grabbed his gun, and cocked it. And just as he was laying there, he waited. You could see you couldn't see what was going on in the other room, but you figured they were going to come in there. The other guy apparently saw that Nevers had a gun, and he shot at Mr. Nevers, shot him in the foot. And then Mr. Nevers shot back. He shot twice, in fact, and hit the other guy in the leg. Now, the footage from inside their apartment shows Nevers in boxers and a T-shirt holding a pistol with both hands, wildly firing at the intruder, identified by the police as a guy by the name of Philip Price. Now, Price allegedly shot both Nevers and his girlfriend as she hid under the covers during the gunfight. His friend was struck in the back and is still in the hospital, Nevers said. And apparently she got shot in the back, and the bullet traveled up and hit her kidney, and then it got lodged in her chest, apparently, and they can't get the bullet out because it's too dangerous. So obviously she's still in the hospital. Mr. Nevers' foot apparently was completely shattered. They apparently put him back together with some plates and some screws. Price also got shot and was hit by a bullet as well. Now, video from outside the house shows Price falling down the stairs while trying to flee, unable to continue forward due to the severity of his own injuries. He was ultimately arrested at the scene and was hit with charges of assault with intent to murder, armed robbery, and a slew of other charges, including, obviously, gun charges. Police are still searching for the second suspect. Nobody seems to know whether that guy was shot or not. Just shows you, ladies and gentlemen, you got to be prepared. You got to be prepared to take care of yourself. You didn't have time to call the police, and even if you did, guess what? They would just be there to put the chalk around your body. Be prepared to protect yourself. Next, the prosecutor who was originally charged in the Ahumaud Arbery incident is getting her own trial. That's right, the hunter becomes the hunted. So Tuesday, a trial started for the former prosecutor, and the question is whether she abused her power to try to protect the man who chased down and killed Ahumaud Arbery in the streets of Georgia nearly 5 years ago. Can you believe it? We brought you that trial 5 years ago. It seems like it was yesterday. Anyway, Jackie Johnson, she was the district attorney there in Glynn County when Arbery was pursued by a truck full of white men and who saw him running through their neighborhood back in February of 2020. They assumed, wrongly, that Mr. Arbery was a thief. The chase ended up with one of the three men fatally shooting Arbery at a close range with a shotgun. More than 2 months passed without arrest as it relates to Mr. Arbery's death until cell phone video of the shooting was leaked online. Remember, it was leaked by a radio talk show host, thinking that these people were justified. In fact, it showed they were completely guilty. Anyway, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took the case over from the local police, and Arbery's pursuers were all charged and later convicted of murder. Now, Johnson, who was also charged back in 2021 with violating her oath of office, which is a felony, as well as a misdemeanor count of hindering the police during the investigation of Mr. Arbery's death. Now, a jury for her trial was seated on Tuesday, and they had nearly 2 hours of opening statements from the prosecutor's office as well as the defense attorney. Prosecutor John Fowler told the jury that police initially told Arbery's mother that her son was shot while committing a home invasion, which turned out to be completely false. As Arbery's families tried in vain to learn more about what had taken place, Johnson was focused on helping the man who started the deadly pursuit. Greg Michaels had retired the previous year from his job as an investigator in Johnson's office as a investigator for their office. It was his son who fired the fatal shotgun blast. An hour later, McMichael left a message for Johnson's cell phone asking her for help. She put the interest of her former chief investigator and her longtime friend ahead of the victim, the prosecutors argued. Johnson's lead attorney, Brian Steele, insists she's innocent. He said the only advice she gave to McMichael after the shooting was, get a lawyer. Steele said that Johnson immediately recused herself and handed the case out to an outside prosecutor. He also blamed local police for jumping to the false conclusion that Arbery had been caught committing a crime and that he was shot in self-defense. Jackie had done nothing to put her finger on the scale of justice, her attorney argued. He told the jury that Johnson assumed Arbery was a burglar because that's what the police had told her, and that she was stunned 2 months later to see the leaked video that told a quite different story. Anyway, the senior judge handling the case, a guy by the name of John R. Turner, seated the jury of 12 plus 3 alternates at the Glynn County Courthouse a week after jury selection began in the port city of Brunswick, Georgia. It was delayed by a rare winter storm that left the coastal community covered in snow and ice. The judge said he expects Johnson's trial to last 2 weeks or more, and it being held at the same courthouse where Arbery's assailants were convicted of murder back in 2021. They were also convicted of federal hate crimes in a separate trial the following year. Now, Greg McMichael and his son Travis McMichael armed themselves and chased Arbery in a pickup truck after seeing Arbery run past their house. A neighbor, William Roddy Bryan, joined the pursuit in his own pickup truck and recorded the cell phone video of the shooting. "My son and I have been involved in a shooting, and I need some advice right away," Greg McMichael said in a voicemail left on Johnson's cell phone after the shooting and later included it in court proceedings. Prosecutors say Johnson abused her power by getting the attorney general to appoint an outside prosecutor whom Johnson knew had already advised police against making arrests. Fowler said Johnson never disclosed that George Barnhill, the first of the 3 outside prosecutors assigned to the case, had concluded Arbery's killing wasn't a crime. She intentionally withheld information so that nobody would know that George Barnhill had already decided the case, the prosecutor argued in opening. Now, Steele said that Johnson had enlisted Barnhill the day after the shooting to advise police because of her relationship with Greg McMichael posed a conflict of interest, but he denied that Johnson recommended Barnhill when she later asked the attorney general to appoint an outside prosecutor. "Jackie doesn't recommend anybody," her attorney stated to the jury. "You'll see the letter." Johnson was also charged in a September 2021 indictment with hindering police by directing them to not arrest Travis McMichael. Fowler, in his opening statement, made no reference to the Johnson telling police not to arrest anyone. Steele said the jury will later hear recorded interviews with police investigators saying they received no such directive from Miss Johnson. Now, Johnson was voted out of office back in November of 2020 after 10 years as the district attorney, and she was largely blaming her defeat on the controversy over this particular case regarding Ahumaud Arbery. We'll follow this trial as it goes. It's very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. You know, that video, I remember when the case started thinking, well, you know, if the guy was a burglar, but it's kind of, I saw problems. You can go back and look at all the videos about it. We followed this case closely. We put the trial up. And then when that video was out, it was done. It was over for these guys. They chased Ahumaud Arbery down. He was unarmed. Travis McMichael got out of that truck, walked up, and shot him in cold blood. And they were all 3 convicted. Next, an ex-detective in Kansas, let's just say he exited himself before his trial for sexually assaulting women was to begin. That's right. A former police detective in Kansas left 5 suicide letters before fatally shooting himself as he was about to stand trial last month over allegations that he sexually assaulted and terrorized vulnerable black women for decades. Now, Roger Gobolski left his house outside of Kansas City, Kansas, for his federal trial about 8:30 a.m. on December 2nd, but returned home before reaching the courthouse some 50 miles away in Topeka, and well, let's just say he never made it to the courthouse. The 71-year-old man was facing 6 felony counts of violating women's civil rights. Prosecutors say he preyed on female residents in poor neighborhoods, demanding sexual favors, for sometimes threatening to harm or jail their relatives. They refused. Now, Gobolski had pled not guilty to the charges against him, and his lead attorney, Christopher Joseph, said before Gobolski's death that the lawsuit related to cases his clients investigated were an inspiration of fabrication by his accusers. Now, the morning of his death, Gobolski's roommate reported hearing a gunshot about 9 a.m. after Gobolski made several phone calls to family and to his attorneys, according to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. The roommate immediately called 911, and when the police arrived, they found Gobolski dead on the back porch. The final autopsy report concluded Gobolski died of a gunshot wound to the head and that his death was ruled a suicide. Now, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation agents traced a handgun found near the body to Kansas City, Missouri, a woman who apparently had it stolen back in 2022. They're not able to determine how Gobolski came in possession with that firearm, but he did. The gravamen of the case against Gabolski focused on two women. One who said the former detective began sexually abusing her when she was in middle school, and another who said he began abusing her after her twin sons were arrested. Prosecutors said 7 other women were planning to testify that Gabolski abused and harassed them as well. Now, despite Gabolski's death, a second criminal case involving 3 co-defendants and allegations of violent sexual trafficking operations is continuing. Ladies and gentlemen, how many times have we said that don't go killing your spouse, just get a divorce? But this woman said divorce wasn't an option. So let me tell you what she did. A woman in Missouri is going to spend at least the next decade behind bars for killing her husband of 9 years, well, because she shot him in the back of the head while he was sleeping. Why? Because she couldn't afford to divorce him. That's right. Anyway, the judge, Jalaiah Otto, ordered Melania Biggins to serve 10 years in the Department of Corrections for the 2022 slaying of Etini L. McEwen. Now, Biggins was originally arrested back in 2022 and charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and armed criminal action, facing a potential life sentence. However, her lawyer reached a deal with prosecutors in which she agreed to plead to 1 count of voluntary manslaughter in exchange for the plea. The more serious charges are dismissed. Good work on the part of her attorney. How this all came about was that officers with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department arrived at a home about 1 a.m. on August 31st. They responded to a shooting at the residence. Police originally contacted the couple's 2 young daughters, who were 10 and 11 at the time, and they were waving their arms to flag down police when they arrived. The police entered the home, went upstairs. They found Biggins administering CPR to her husband, who was laying on the bed in a pool of blood. Obviously, the emergency personnel couldn't do anything, and Mr. McEwen was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, Biggins allegedly told police that she woke up to the sound of a gunshot and noticed her husband was shot, but she didn't see who did it. She claimed that she went downstairs and saw that the front door was open. Obviously, the bad guy got away, right? No. Turns out police determined the shooting was not a suicide and found no signs of forced entry whatsoever. Also, a pillow was located on the floor at the foot of the bed with an apparent blood and a hole through it. Crime scene investigators were able to locate the projectile in the stuffing of the pillow, and a blanket was also located on the floor with a hole through it and an apparent gunpowder burns around the hole. In the closet of the gun, guess what? They found a Charter Arms 38 Special, which was located at the top shelf in the closet. In the next room over, a purple-black Charter 38 Arms Special was located underneath a bunk bed as well. Anyway, the firearm had 1 spent shell casing still inside the cylinder in the top position. And guess what? The 2 children, whose names were redacted from the affidavits, allegedly told investigators that they woke up to the sound of a gunshot. The 2 then went downstairs and found their mother sitting on the couch. One girl allegedly said Biggins looked as if she had seen a ghost. The girl then went upstairs and entered the parents' bedroom, according to the police. Anyway, she entered her parents' bedroom and observed the victim lying on the bed. So she then turned on the lamp next to the bed, immediately noticed that the victim was bleeding, so she ran back into her room to call the police. The child then handed the phone to Biggins, and the call takers told her to begin CPR. While Biggins was doing CPR, she could hear the victim gurgling blood. Now, in the second interview with police later that day, Biggins claimed that she was awoken by the sound of a gunshot and found her husband bleeding next to her. She said that she had never left the bedroom prior to the police arriving at the scene, contradicting her own daughter, and that she found the door open, like I mentioned. Anyway, Biggins initially stated that the only gun in the home was her husband's rifle, which was stored in the closet, according to the affidavit. However, when confronted with the purchase records, she allegedly had to admit that she bought this 38 Special back in July of 2022, and she was unable to explain how the firearm ended up under a bed in another room. Well, Biggins allegedly admitted that she wanted to leave her husband for another man. When asked about her relationship with the victim, she said they were legally married for 9 years, but they had some financial issues, and she had been in an intimate relationship with someone else for a year and a half. Biggins also wanted to get a divorce from the victim, but due to their financial struggles, that just wasn't an option. So what's the easiest thing to do? Obviously, shoot the husband in the back of the head while he sleeps. No, not an option, ladies and gentlemen. Don't do that. Ms. Biggins found out that's the wrong thing to do. Anyway, yesterday we brought you a story about a son who had zero remorse about shooting his dad in the back of the head while he ate his salad. Well, we got another story today. A father in Ohio gunned down his daughter, who was 24, with a pistol during an argument that revolved around smoking in the house, and then expressed zero remorse about it when interviewed by police. Franklin Thompson was apparently found wandering a block away from his home with the murder weapon in his pocket early Monday morning after the shooting, which obviously now he's in jail for charges of first-degree murder. Now, his daughter, Rebecca Thompson, who was 18, was found by a sister with a fatal gunshot wound after Thompson allegedly fired multiple rounds at her. Police say that apparently it had a recent brain operation that caused some lasting issues, but it's unclear what those issues are exactly. Prosecutors allege that Thompson and his daughter were allegedly having an argument that revolved around smoking in the house when he opened fire on her about 1 a.m. The irony of it is no one knows who was arguing about who was smoking. Anyway, when Thompson was interviewed by the sheriffs, he admitted to the shooting. And needless to say, Mr. Thompson is in custody and being held on a $1 million bond. His next court date is February 6th. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. My guess is the brain injury, something's not right. I had many clients with traumatic brain injuries over the years. Sometimes they just get rewired, and the mildest, slightest things can set somebody off, and people that had no history of violence will literally start doing something. So I'm sure his defense attorneys will explore that option quite in depth. Next, this day in legal history. That's right, January 29th, 1861, Kansas joins the Union as a free state. That's right, Kansas was admitted to the United States as the 34th state on January 29th, 1861, and its admission as a free state was obviously a big development, and then it led up to the Civil War, reflecting on, obviously, the division in the country over slavery. Next on this date, January 29th, 1975, the Weather Underground, a radical left-wing organization, detonated a bomb at the United States State Department in Washington, D.C. Obviously, that was kind of the bigger focus to say, hey, we have to worry about domestic terrorists. Then on this date in 1958, the capture of a killing spree killer, a guy by the name of Charles Starkweather, was apprehended. So on January 29th, on this date in 1958, Charles Starkweather was apprehended by law enforcement in Wyoming after a killing spree that left 11 people dead across Nebraska and Wyoming. His capture ended the notorious crime spree and led to discussion about juvenile delinquency and the death penalty, as Starkweather was just 19 years old at the time of his arrest. And on this date, Patty Hearst's prison sentence was commuted. That's right. The kidnapped heiress, Patty Hearst's 7-year prison sentence for bank robbery as a member of the Symbionese Liberation Army was commuted by President Jimmy Carter. Hearst was later pardoned by Bill Clinton. Could it be because her last name just happened to end with Hearst? Big publishing family, lots of money, perhaps. Who knows? And on this date in 1863, 250 northern Shoshone Indians, including women and children, were killed by the United States Army in what is now the state of Idaho. Now, I think it's a little worth exploring this one. I don't know, Western justice just is interesting because in this particular case, well, nobody was ever charged. What can you do? Anyway, so back on this date, a little more explanation. In 1863, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor and about 200 California volunteers attacked a northwestern Shoshone winter village located on the Beaver Creek and Bear Rivers, which is about 12 miles west of the north village of Franklin in Cache Valley there in Idaho, and just a short distance north of the present Utah-Idaho-Utah boundary. Now, this band of 450 Shoshone under War Chief Bear Hunter had watched uneasily as Mormon farmers had moved into the Indian home of Cache Valley in the spring of 1860, and now, 3 years later, had apportioned all of the land and water of the Verdant Mountain Valley. Now, the young men of the tribe had struck back at the white settlers. This prompted the Utah territorial officials to call on Connor's troops to punish the band of Indians. And before the colonel led his men from Camp Douglas at Salt Lake City north to Bear River, he had announced that he intended to take no prisoners. As the troopers approached the Indian camp in the early morning darkness, about 6 a.m., they found the Shoshone warriors entrenched behind the 10-foot eastern embankment of Beaver Creek, afterwards called the Battle Creek. The volunteers suffered most of their 23 casualties in their first charge across the open plain in front of the Shoshone village. Colonel Connor soon changed tactics, which resulted in a complete envelopment of the Shoshone camp by the soldiers, who began firing on the Indian men, women, and children indiscriminately. By 8 a.m., the Indian men were out of ammunition, and the last 2 hours of the battle became a massacre as the soldiers used their revolvers to shoot down all the Indians they could find in the dense willows of the camp. Approximately 250 Shoshone were slain, including 90 women and children. After the slaughter ended, some of the undisciplined soldiers went through the Indian village, raping women and using axes to bash in their heads of women and children who had already died of their wounds. Now, Chief Bear Hunter was killed alongside his sub-chief, Lehi. The troops burned the 75 Indian lodges, recovered 1,000 bushels of wheat and flour, and appropriated 175 Shoshone horses. While the troops cared for their wounded and took their dead back to Camp Douglas for burial, the Indians' bodies were left in the field for the wolves and crows. Although the Mormon settlers in the Cache Valley expressed their gratitude for the movement of Colonel Connor and the intervention of the Almighty in their behalf, the Bear River massacre has been overlooked in history of the West, chiefly because it occurred during the Civil War, when obviously there were other things taking place on the East Coast. And finally, our dumb criminal of the day. A Texas man pulled over for going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit ended up behind bars for unleashing a tirade of expletives and insults at the police officer who conducted the traffic stop. Now, general rule of thumb, I remember when I did ride-alongs when I was on active duty. When I was officer of the day, we would go out with the MPs, and the general rule was 9, you're fine, 10, you're mine. If you go 10 miles over the speed limit, they got you. So you got to remember that general rule, okay? Anyway, take a look at this video. This goes back to April 18th of last year, which is about 130 miles east of Dallas. Now, the driver, a guy by the name of Trenton Futrell, pulled into his driveway after a Longview police officer made the traffic stop. Futrell got out of his car pickup and immediately became confrontational. Take a look at this video. Anyway, as you can see, Mr. Futrell went to jail and later posted bond. Was it really worth it, Mr. Futrell? Somehow I'm doubting it. But you are a dumb criminal of the day for making poor decisions like that. Just take your ticket, go fight it in court. You're not going to win that battle. All right, that's all we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk. And remember, the Constitution matters.